Asking people to leave a job that they know will never be the same again is not the same as asking them to leave their government. It's clear in the Reddit fed news that a lot of them feel like they're being asked to abandon their democracy. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist and I research the unwritten rules of work for people from low income backgrounds and neurodivergence. And to me, it has been very clear that this administration change in the US is being treated like a merger and acquisition. It is very obvious, as seen below, that this directly mirrors the merger or the buyout of Twitter a few years ago. But the government is not a startup. Mass layoffs without a needs analysis of understanding what that role is and how it impacts your company is always foolish, especially in a merger and acquisition when you're just getting started. We've seen companies fire people and be repeatedly shocked at how it impacts them. Look at the CEO of Spotify's statement when he was surprised that firing 1 in 7 people impacted his company. When you do that to a software company, for example, yes, it impacts your bottom line and the livelihood of all the people that have worked at that organization. And as someone who cares very passionately about social class mobility and social class security, economic security, that's devastating. However, when you apply those same tactics to a government, that becomes a risk for everyone living in that government because several, not all, but several government run things are life and death. For example, the Federal Aviation Administration. Firing in a company without a needs analysis is foolish. Firing the federal government without a needs analysis is dangerous. Simon Sinek has built his career on the idea of leaders needing to be very clear what their why is and that people will work for places where they care about the why, not just the money. I think there's truth in that statement within reason because I'm the social class person, right? So I'm more of a fan of saying that you have to treat people well for them to stay with you. I'm sure the why matters. You don't want to stay with someone who treats people well and is, Hitler. But I don't know of an example off the top of my head of that happening. Though I can't give a specific example of that happening that I know of, maybe to a small inner circle of chosen ones and elites. I'm curious what a Venn diagram of leaders who know their why and leaders who treat people well would look like. Maybe there's a lot of overlap. Maybe these are leaders who already think long term and are able to see how people and profits don't have to be enemies. Purpose and profits don't have to be enemies. They can go together. And they can think beyond immediate Wall Street pressure and are then able to do well on Wall Street long term. A company who's done this really well is Costco, for example. And back in the day, Costco got a lot of shit from Sam's Club for focusing on long term and employee development, but they consistently outperformed Sam's Club on Wall Street. They just had to think long term. So I'm not completely sold on the why. I think it's a why and. But in the federal government, the why is everything. I'm not currently a federal employee, but I have been. And the vetting process can be very intense. And for some roles, it is really intense. You take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States on your first day after months of background checks and even sometimes character checks. And federal employees are held to much higher standards than our politicians are in many ways. As a federal employee, there are limitations to what you can or cannot post online. You cannot leave the country without filing it first. You can't work abroad to take federal equipment abroad and then you have to debrief when you come back. You can't be dabbling in drugs or posting certain things if you want to keep your clearances. And you do all of this knowing that you are making less money than industry average. In my private sector career, I have worked as a consultant with federal agencies who have struggled to retain certain industries like data scientists because the money in private sector is so lucrative compared to what they get paid in the Fed. And let me tell you, my dad, who is a military veteran, when I got my benefits package as a federal employee, he was like, "What do you mean you still have to pay for your benefits?" That was the whole point of being a Fed back in my day, was that your benefits were really good and cheap because you were already taking a salary cut. And I was like, yeah, well, guess what? That's not true in this decade. I'm not saying there are no redundancies or no inefficiencies that need to be worked out in the federal government. Every federal employee rolls their eyes at the bureaucracy and, the limited technology access, etc. Like it's a pain, trust me. Nobody's in denial of that. But the demonization of federal workers right now is very strange to me. So I guess what I'm getting at is if you're in a leadership position, maybe listen to what Simon Sinek is saying about the why. And I would challenge you to also think about how your success in other situations may not translate to current situation. There's actually higher rate of failure among people who have been successful before because they get cocky. So for example, the guy who invented the Segway, and the Segway was a flop, had been lucratively successful in making medical supplies. He was great at that, but he got over cocky. And you know who invested in the Segway? Steve Jobs and a bunch of others, because they had been successful before and they got over cocky. They didn't think through developing the Segway and who would use it and how would it even be, how would it fit in current infrastructure, etc. Like that none of them seem to think about how a car seat would fit on that is a little wild to me, and I'm not even a parent. So again, be careful, think things through, and remember, because you've been successful before doesn't mean you don't need to bring in subject matter experts in a new area before you change industries. For everybody else, I encourage you to not demonize all federal workers. I encourage you not to demonize an entire group at all. To be really careful about what you're doing over the next few days as the federal government adjusts to whatever is going to happen. I mean, for example, the FAA doesn't even have its leaders right now. They resigned and haven't been replaced. And to be mindful of where you spend your money, because ultimately that is what business listens to.